Our meeting. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday and happy 1st of April. No fool, so not before this is a real meeting, so we're not kidding. Just we'll go ahead and start with our meeting, and if we can go around and just introduce ourselves who's in the room. I can start with myself. I'm Abdul Majidi, and I'm a vice chair for Human Restoration.
Jorge Espinosa, member.
Arwen Bird, member.
Donica Fry, member.
Eddie Sherman, member.
Hector Lopez, member.
Emily Godfrey,
Member. Tricia Knoll, member.
Amanda Fritz, Commissioner in charge of Office of Human Relations.
Anastasia Gatsy, member.
Dora Perrin, Office of Commissioner Fritz.
Dunesh Patero, guest.
John Eckhart, Portland Police Bureau.
Mike Tabor, Independent Media.
Kofi Desu, staff.
Carmen Rubio, Commissioner Fish's office.
And I'm Tracy Reed from the Portland City Attorney's Office.
And Maria Lisa Johnson, Director.
Thank you. Welcome. Welcome. And I would like to welcome Ms. Carmen Rubio. Hopefully I did not mispronounce your name. And she's from staff for Commissioner Fish. Would you like to say some words?
I just wanted to say thank you for extending the invitation to Commissioner Fish to be here today. And regretfully, he had a family commitment that he didn't realize he scheduled over. So he is with his daughter this evening and regrets the double booking. Really looks forward to coming to one of your next meetings. So I just wanted to let you know that he feels really, really badly about it. And I'm happy to be here today and to meet all of you and to be sitting there with you.
Welcome and good to have you. And always family is first. And most respect for people who family is first. So if we can also take a moment to look at the agenda and review it and see if we all agree and approve it, or there's something you'd like to change or add.
If we have time, if the meeting runs smoothly, I believe Commissioner Maxey wanted to place on the agenda a topic, the movie Papers, and she was prepared to have the folks show a clipping of the film in preparation for asking for support for that film. I don't think there'll be time for the actual clip, but maybe just a little more time than a 1-second announcement would be good.
Oh.
If folks are okay with that.
Anything else? Or we approve the minutes? I'm sorry, the agenda? Good. Okay. Third item is approval of minutes. If we also can take a moment to look at the minutes and yes?
Oh, I have two. I was looking at the minutes, so I have two things to say.
Oh, okay.
Can I go ahead? I'm sorry. Under approval of minutes, I think there's a typo on the misspelling of my last name, K-N-O-L-L. And under announcements, I think that's Seder, not Cedar, so it's another typo, S-E-D-E-R.
Thank you.
It's the English teacher.
Where's the Seder misspelled?
It's under announcements at the very end.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I think
You
it was
didn't
a
pick it
computer
up, huh?
glitch.
Do you think I learned that?
No. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
S-E-D-E-R.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't trust spell check.
Patricia, you changed your name?
My name is spelled K-N-O-L-L, and I'm sure it must be me here under approval of minutes.
Yes, that's a different name.
receive them.
So,
Move that we receive them.
yeah,
Second.
approve.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, now we move to the training ethics. And thank you for coming.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I'm actually, as I said, I'm Tracy Reeve, and I'm from the Portland City Attorney's Office, and I'm a member of our office that sort of has responsibility for advising the commission and the office generally if they have legal questions coming up. My sort of areas of specialty are constitutional law and civil litigation. So that's kind of what I do. And I do some advising on civil rights matters and that sort of thing. And so I did some work with the mayor's office when we were setting up the commission after the work group did it. And we've been trying to be a little bit better about giving a little bit of training to the boards and commissions on public meetings law, public records law, and then the state ethics law. And I'm going to do public records and public meetings first, and my intention is to just hit the high points. I wanted to say that I'm always available if really a lot of this stuff is kind of fact specific as it comes up. And any of you can call me if you have a public records or public meeting question or an ethics question and something that comes up specifically. But the point of this training and maybe the handouts I'm going to give out is just even to help you with issue spotting, because some of it's a little counterintuitive and people don't know that they're running afoul of one of those, or there might be an issue that they need to think about because it's sort of not how we naturally think of things. Particularly the ethics law, which you may have heard in the press, it's been, particularly for volunteer boards and commissions, it's pretty onerous. And a lot of the smaller cities that have volunteer, even mayors and council members have had a hard time getting people. And so right now in the legislature, there is a measure that's passed the Senate and is waiting to go to the House that may ease things up a little bit, but we don't know if that's going to pass yet. It is something that Portland, along with other cities, is trying to get the legislature to take a look at how onerous the ethics law has been. So as I said, I think I'll start with public records and meeting law, but I'll just maybe pass out one going each way. This is the ethics law summary, and this is the public records and meetings. I know this is a little dry. Yeah, but, and I hope I made 20 copies of each. Thank you. So as those are going around, and I just might ask, how many of you have any familiarity with public records and public meetings? So some of you, but not everybody. Well, both the public records law and the public meetings laws are, intended to something I'm sure that is within the keeping of this commission's mission to, so they're called the sunshine laws, or allowing.
Do you have any more copies?
Oh, I don't. I just made. I'm sorry. Did I
There
not
might
make
be
enough?
some.
Maybe people could. I had made.
Yeah, oh, there's some, yeah.
Okay. So the purpose of the public records law and the public meetings law is to make sure that government business is conducted with public participation and public knowledge. And commissions such as this one are within the coverage of both the public records law and the public meetings law. So even though you're appointed rather than elected, and even though you're not the city council, you're still subject to the public records and public meetings law. So under the public records law, there's a presumption that all public records, that every person in the state has the right to inspect any public record. And there's a few exceptions, and I'm going to maybe just very briefly hit on those, but the general presumption is for disclosure. And anytime, when you do get to the exemptions from disclosure, it's a weighing test, and they're not absolute exemptions for the most part. And so with the weighing test, if you end up litigating that, and I have actually litigated a couple of these cases, is the public interest in disclosure greater than the public interest that's served by whatever the exemption is? And usually the answer is yes. So the assumption of the law and the presumption that the courts apply is that, where in doubt, there will be disclosure. So what the statute says is that every person has a right to inspect any public record of a public body in this state, except as otherwise provided. And as I mentioned, a city commission would be considered a public body, so subject to the law. And a person is any natural person, corporation, partnership, firm, association, member, or committee of the Legislative Assembly. So basically, pretty much covers everyone and everything. And as I said, the next bullet point down just mentions that boards, commissions of a city or governing body are subject to the public record law. So what is a public record? Well, basically it's any writing that contains information relating to the conduct of the public's business used or retained by a public body, regardless of form or characteristics. So any record that this commission uses, any record that this commission keeps, would be a public record, and unless it's within one of the exceptions. So that includes emails, that includes tape recordings, that includes, it doesn't have to be an actual written document. So that's very broad as well. I have here the definition of writing, which as you can see is very broad, includes photographs, every means of recording, electronic, etc. And it says, interest and concern of citizens in public records recognizes no jurisdictional boundaries and extends to such records wherever they may be found. So the important thing to keep in mind with that is it doesn't have to be a piece of paper, and it doesn't have to be here at the offices or at the location of an actual meeting. If you have materials that are being kept electronically on your home computers that are used by the commission in the conduct of its business, those would be covered. And there was, you guys may remember the Nike versus the City of Beaverton case having to do with the possible annexation of the Nike campus. That was one of the big holdings there, that all the city council's home computers were subject to search for public records. So it's something to keep in mind, even if you're doing commission work at home, stuff that you have on your computer would technically, if a public records request comes in, that would be subject to disclosure, which means that your personal computer might be subject to search. Now, normally you wouldn't get to the point where somebody was coming in and taking your computer. Normally you would get a public records request and it would come in and we would work with you to make sure that we got all of the public records, and you only get to the point where they're actually searching your hard drives and that sort of thing if there's either a discovery dispute or if the court, if it goes to court for whatever reason the court thinks you're not being forthcoming. But still, it is good to keep in mind that your personal computer could technically be subject to search in response to a public records request.
So even the delete button wouldn't help?
No, because it's still on your hard drive.
No.
So
I'm sorry,
yeah.
that doesn't mean, because I know in some occasions that the personal computer can be subpoenaed. In this case, can be subpoenaed as well.
Well, it's not technically a subpoena. What happens is, where the process works is if somebody made a public records request and said, all records of the Human Relations Commission, right? Commission, I would get which one's the office, okay. Human Rights Commission, pertaining to XYZ. And we would then, work with you to say, where are all those records kept? Would any of the commissioners have those records on their computers? And we would ask that those be provided. So it's not technically a subpoena. Then if whomever we were providing the public records to felt for whatever reason, or we might object, we might say we think that's subject to one of the exceptions. And if whomever we provided records to thought that they were incomplete, they could then go to the district attorney and say, order the city to produce more records. And then then we would make arguments to the district attorney and they would rule one way or the other as they have the initial burden of making that determination. Then either party can appeal to the court from there. And so it wouldn't actually be a subpoena, but it could get to the point where it was a court order. And it doesn't mean that all of your personal records are subject to disclosure, but just keep in mind that the hard drive could be searched to separate which are the personal records and which are not. Now your personal records, just because they're on the same computer as commission records, wouldn't be subject to disclosure, but it might be subject to search. So, and this is kind of a worst case analysis thing. I just want you to be aware that that possibility is there, and as I say, the goal would be if the public records request came in, that we would look at it, we would see if it fit within the public records law, if there were any exemptions that we felt applied, and then we would work to provide the records without getting to anybody searching anybody's computer. But that possibility is there, yes.
Hypothetical situation, totally hypothetical. Let's say that there is a call for a request for getting information, this public record, right? And let's say that it is presumed that I am keeping public records on my computer, okay? And I tell you, no, I'm not. What would happen then?
Well, that's where you get into the areas where, you know, if presumably, I mean, I think we would believe the members of the commission if they told us they were not keeping any. We would go back to the other side and say, here's the public records that we have, and we've done a good faith survey of our commission members, and they've told us that this is all there is. Now, if for some reason the requestor had a reason to believe that that was not accurate and had some kind of information, they could go to the, first of all, they'd come to us, say, you know, for XYZ reason, go back and ask again, and then we might come back and say, you know, this information has been forthcoming. But that's the kind of situation where in a worst case analysis, they could go to the DA and then potentially to the court, and then those would be the people who would have to decide whether or not. I mean, it's a fairly extreme remedy to go to your personal computer and say, bring it in for the hard drive to be searched, but technically that could happen.
So this another question, because this is sometimes can be serious when in the area where I'm trying to add this, is sometimes when you have a lunch hour or 15 minutes break or after 5 p.m. and you are at work and doing the Human Rights Commission work at your work computer, maybe just keep this in mind, what can happen later on. So.
Right, and I think that again, it would be an extreme circumstance where there would have to be some kind of information, I think, before a court would ever say your work computer is then subject to search. Even if it were, the court would never order your work material released. It would just be the information that was on the computer that pertained to the commission work. But in most circumstances, what would happen is, you know, we try to ascertain if anybody had that and would say, could you get us that information off your work computer or your home computer, wherever you were doing that work, and then we would provide the information.
When we were looking at the form that the Office of Human Relations uses for reporting possible crimes of racial violence or whatever, or hate crimes, the issue came up, there were some pull downs where people could identify themselves by sexual orientation or whatever, and I think that Kofi and I talked about whether or not the city attorney's office should draft some language to go on that form about the fact that that becomes public record, right? Doesn't it, as soon as somebody submits that to a city agency?
It does, unless it would come within one of the exceptions. And as I say, I don't like to rely very much on the exceptions because when push comes to shove, the exceptions usually stand up as.
But did we ever get any language from the city attorneys about advising people about the fact that on the form that it could become public record? I mean, my concern was somebody identifying themselves as something that they may not want their employee, they may not want to see it on the Willamette Week, you know, and so.
You answered that question for us, and the answer was that information that identified the individual could be regarded as confidential, but that the incident or whatever was being reported could not.
Right.
Oh, so the name, address, phone number could be?
And this one we did talk about because, and this, I do remember this particular question, and the exemption that applies to that one would be, and I didn't go through all of the exemptions in here because there's a lot of
It didn't
detail.
all though.
Right, it was,
Wasn't enough.
there's one where if people ask for information to be kept confidential.
192,445.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm looking in the not.
Memorize it for us,
You read it off.
Yes. Well, the personal safety exemption is for like home address, telephone number, email address, and that one,
There's quite an onerous little checklist that people have to go through to provide.
right,
you know,
and that's what I was starting
You can't
to
just say I'm
say.
in danger and have the agency accept it.
Right,
It
and
has
that,
to be-
there is that one, and that one is likely, if the checklist is upheld, that is one that's likely to be upheld. But there's also another one for information that I thought was the more likely one for the particular concern about people just providing information to the commission that they might not want disclosed, and that is for information that's provided in confidence. But to meet that one, they have to ask that it, that it be, they have to submit it under the circumstances that it will be kept confidential, and the commission would have to be agreeing that it be kept confidential, and even then, you would still come to that balancing test of did their interest in not having the
So if
information.
Willamette Week made a request for all of those things that are provided through that computer, I can't remember that, you know, through our website, they probably would get that information since there is no current protection on there that says I'm submitting this in confidence, nor is there anything really ones in, is it? I mean, is that something that we need to keep vigilant about?
Right, and if we looked at, when we did look at this question and we looked at the confidentiality, the information submitted in confidence exemption, I know that Marie-Lisa and I felt like if push came to shove, that information would likely not qualify for the exemption. For it to even arguably qualify, it would have to be that they were saying, I'm submitting this in confidence and I want it to become confidential. The commission would have to be saying, we won't release this information. And what we always recommend in that situation is to say, you know, the commission agrees not to release this information unless legally required to do so pursuant to a public records request. Because we can't know how that balancing test is going to come out. We can't make a guarantee that we'll keep it confidential if the DA or the court says, no, you're wrong, the public interest is in disclosure.
But that's probably the place where we're most vulnerable to having some kind of interaction around the public record law.
What we would often do also is a circumstance like that, often if it's Willamette Week or the press.
It doesn't matter who it is. I mean,
The press, generally speaking, and they're often the ones who would litigate because, you know, they have the resources and they're the ones who have the interest in getting information out to the public. Often in that situation, they're not wanting to get necessarily people's names and phone numbers unless, you know, unless there's a particular reason why they do want to. And we'll try to provide redacted, what we call redacted, where names and identifying information are taken out before we produce the record. So that's something we would just try to do anyway. But I guess the upshot is I just want you to be aware, and we would want anybody submitting information to us to be aware that while we would do our best efforts to keep information confidential, if people asked it to be kept confidential, and if we agreed to do it, that we can't make any guarantees that that will happen.
Just before we continue, because this train is supposed to go until 4:30, and we're past that, and also we started this about 10 minutes, I would like to make a suggestion. If we can, probably because this is, Tracy made the whole trip to here and trying to go through this, and we would hate to bring her back to go because we didn't finish or things like that, is if we can maybe take off brainstorm training needs, that is about 15 minutes from 5:10 to 5:25, and do that in our next meeting, so we can finish this. How does it sound to you?
I have a brain. Yeah.
It sounds okay to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay.
So we covered basically who may inspect a public record, and that's pretty much anybody. And now the question, does it matter what their reason for doing it is? Do they have to show that they have some good reason? The answer is no. Generally speaking, the motive, the need, what they want it for is irrelevant. Okay, and now the exemptions, and I wasn't going to go in complete detail because there's a lot of them and there's a lot of criteria that they have to apply. Some are, you know, this, what I'm holding here is the Attorney General's Public Records and Meeting Manual, and it's sort of the Bible that we go to in interpreting this, and it's something that's, you know, pretty readily available. So it's primarily a disclosure law rather than a exemption law. All of the exemptions are conditional, that is, they exempt certain types of information from disclosure unless the public interest requires disclosure in a particular instance. So there are no absolutes. It always goes back to this weighing test. And then you go into the weighing test knowing that the presumption is in favor of disclosure. So the presumption is in favor of disclosure. What is the public interest in disclosure that it gets weighed against? Well, it's not specified in the statute. The Court of Appeals has said that the public interest is the right of citizens to monitor what elected and appointed officials are doing on the job, and obviously it can be formulated in a lot of ways, but it's a very broad interest in having access to the conduct of the public business. So I'm just going to really briefly mention the exemptions and maybe say just a couple of words about the ones that might apply more. We talked briefly about the personal safety exemption. If someone was, the victim of a hate crime, for instance, and you guys were working on those issues, and they certainly didn't want whoever it was that might be committing those kinds of acts against them to have their information, then this exemption would apply. And they would need to submit a written request to the public body, which could just be on a form. I mean, it doesn't have to be a handwritten, written request. It could be on a form. I requested this information be kept confidential. And it says a public body may not disclose a specified public record if the individual demonstrates to the satisfaction of the public body the personal safety of the individual or the personal safety of a family member residing with the individual is in danger if the home address, personal telephone number, or electronic mail address remains available for public inspection, meaning that having that information available would endanger them. So, and that one, because, if there is a showing that it's going to be a threat to someone's public safety, that is more likely to be upheld from disclosure than most of the other exemptions are. Okay, public employees' identification card or badge. Public records pertaining to litigation, just like there's a privilege for, anybody else who's in litigation. The public records exemption is meant to give a public body that's in litigation the same sort of privilege of not disclosing attorney-client communications or work product pertaining to that litigation. Trade secrets probably doesn't apply too much to you guys, but that would go, if you're for some reason you're getting corporate records or something and people have trade secret information. Criminal investigatory material. This would be like, information that the police are compiling for law enforcement purposes. Tests and examination material, that would be more for promotional stuff, employees. Business records, real estate appraisal, employee representation cards, that's for like unions that people won't be retaliated against. Civil rights investigation material, which sounds like it would be promising for you all, but that's actually specifically related to Bureau of Labor and Industries and specified statutes. Unfair labor practice, union type things, debt collection agency investigation records, archaeological site information, personnel disciplinary actions, which would certainly apply to the office's employees. Threatened or endangered species, faculty research. And as you can see, I didn't put all these in because I'm just trying to see which other ones. Social Security numbers, in particular court records. Internal advisory communications. And this is one where a public body, within a public body or between public bodies of an advisory nature, and you're trying to do an investigation and you want to be able to, say, critique your own performances and have that protected so that there's an interest in full disclosure. But I have to say that I did litigate that one in the context of the police. Certain records were requested after the Perez shooting case, and the police had done a whole investigation of that and a related outside study of use of deadly force cases, and we were saying that some of that information was privileged under this internal advisory communications and were partly successful before the district attorney and then lost in the court. So again, the court found that this exemption did apply in that it was covered. What we were saying, that those records were covered. They agreed with that. They agreed that there was a public interest in protecting them. They just found it outweighed by the public interest in disclosure because they said when there's a tie, disclosure wins. And so, even if you meet some of these exemptions, the court could still say the interest in disclosure is greater than the interest in the exemption.
So I'm sorry, another question. Is that when here it says for review in the reduction, public bodies have a positive duty to separate exempt and non-exempt and can make non-exempt material available, but exempt not available for examination?
Right. Well, what that means is that even if you have records, some portion of which comes within the exemption, you can't just say these records are covered by the exemption. You would have to, redact or keep out the material that's covered with the exemption and supply the rest of the material. Okay. We covered that. Okay, and I already mentioned that what happens is it gets appealed to the district attorney. If we deny, the district attorney makes a decision. That decision can be appealed to the courts. Again, what I would urge is if specific instances come up or there's a concern about what kind of information should we be providing to people who are giving us information, feel free to call me because it's very fact specific and I can work my way through all these exemptions and see if any apply and help you out with language on what you're telling people who are providing information to you. Are there any more questions before I kind of skip on to public meetings?
Just for the sake of time, probably we need to move to ethics law, possibly.
Okay, let me just do a second, because the ethics law is more covered, and this is in very outlined form. The ethics law is actually fairly self-explanatory in the handout, and I will cover that if we have time. But I just want to very briefly go through public meetings law, because some people aren't aware, and you could get into trouble on this one. I don't know what number is a quorum for you guys, but 8, okay. So it may not be as likely that, when you have a city council of 5 and 3 is a quorum, they may not realize that if 3 of them bump into each other in the hall and are talking about something, that's a public meeting, and they can't.
Only with quorum. Only with quorum is there.
Right. It's not a public meeting unless you have a quorum.
So the committees that meet, committees of the Human Rights Commission that do not have quorum are not public meetings?
It would depend on what the business is that they're doing, and we can talk specifically about that. I'd have to look at it. It depends on what your role you're taking in advising the public body. It may be that committee itself is the public body, but we'd have to look at what their function is, exactly what function they're performing. So if you do have a quorum of the commission, that constitutes a public meeting if you're doing any kind of discussing any kind of official business. So if it's a purely social event and you're all there and there's no business being discussed, that's not a public meeting. The problem is if you start drifting into talking about business because it's natural and you're all there and that's what you're doing. So it's something to really keep in mind. Something else to keep in mind is that the public meetings law applies whether it's a physical face-to-face meeting or not. So if you're on the telephone conference call and it's a quorum and you're discussing commission business, that's a public meeting and you can't do that without giving notice and providing for public access. Email, if you're having, everybody's in a Human Rights Commission chat room and you're all talking about some kind of business and there's a quorum, that would be a public meeting and it would be in violation of the public meeting law unless there was notice that was occurring in some kind of method for the public to access that. Yes.
What about an educational bus trip that the commission would go on if there were a quorum?
The key there is if it's a training or an educational mission and you're not actually discussing commission business. I mean, if it's purely that you're training on something, sometimes there are staff retreats or something, and occasionally if it's not the subject of commission business, but say it's purely directed to interpersonal communications and learning to function better as a group, that will be exempt from the public meetings law. The problem is that very often those kinds of things tend to slide into discussion of official business. So if you were all going someplace and you were not talking about commission business and you were purely getting trained on something that wasn't, pertaining to in any way reaching a consensus on something, then it technically would not be. But often what happens is that business gets discussed anyway. And the email thing is something to be aware of. People do get hung up on that sometimes. The city of Gresham is actually set up there because their city council members have city-provided computers and do a lot of email and everything. They've actually made it where they can't all be on the same email system at the same time so that they can avoid that, physically their computers are set up so that they can't physically get more than 3 or more of them on there at the same time. And so I won't belabor this, but if it is a public meeting, and then you have, the requirements are that there be notice, that the public have a right to attend. That doesn't mean the public has the right to participate. I mean, you don't have to allow the public that attends your meetings to participate in them. They just have the right to attend. There are specific circumstances, and I know I'm running out of time, so I won't go into them, but there are a few specific circumstances where you can go into what's called an executive session and exclude the public. That would be to discuss litigation, to discuss personnel actions, that sort of thing. Even when you do that, the press has the right to attend, but they don't have the right to report on what's covered. But it's sort of keeps
So like if this group wanted to have a working retreat, we can?
You can, but you just have to let the public attend.
That's a good thing. This is a good thing.
No, it's just,
Yeah.
it just is different.
What if there's no room at the retreat for anybody?
Well, I mean, again, that's the kind of situation, if you want to have a retreat, let's have a specific conversation about where it would be and what the circumstances would be, because it's going to be very fact specific and what kind of access has to be provided and what kind of notice has to be provided. And but generally speaking, it would depend. If you're retreating to do commission business, it would probably be subject to public records, and you'd probably have to do some kind of notice that that's what you were doing, and then there'd have to be some kind of ability of the public to observe or participate. It could be limited. I mean, you don't have to accommodate every single member of the public that wants to come, but there has to be reasonable access, which varies depending on what the circumstances are. So, and then just basically the ethics law, I know we're about out of time and you guys have a lot more interesting things to work on. So maybe what I'll do is just leave this with you. It's, this was fairly recently enacted in the last legislative session. It's very onerous, and as I say, it's caused a lot of problems. A lot of small cities and that have, volunteer elected officials that have other occupations and livelihoods. It's very limiting on them. The limitations on the amount of gifts that you can accept are extreme. They apply to your family members. One of the things that is being contemplated, or that's present in the bill that the Senate has passed, that hasn't yet been passed by the House, is that the nexus now is, and I cribbed this from the city of Pendleton because they put together a good version of it. So the nexus now is you can't accept more than, or a family member can't accept more than $50 in gifts in a year from anybody with an interest in doing business with the city. So if you think about that, that's hugely broad. And, I mean, when we in my office were doing our own internal training on this, it's like, well, so if I have a friend who in some completely different area has some interest in, dividing their property that's completely nothing to do with me or what I do for the city, I can't, maybe accept a meal at their home if the wine's going to be more than, what the value is. It includes meals, it includes wine, liquor that you're served, anything like that. So it's very easy to run afoul of this. It's like, can my kid go to their kid's birthday party if they're going to have, the bouncy house there? What's the value of that? And so it's not as if the ethics police are running around with all of this, but what happens is the way these ethics concerns get raised is when something controversial gets decided and somebody comes looking for a way to kind of attack it after the fact. So I really wanted this to be a heads up. about the fact that the ethics law does apply to all of you. It's very onerous. It's the limitations. You can't accept any entertainment. So, you know, no Trailblazer tickets from somebody who has an interest in doing business with the city. What the new law would do if this amendment passes is it would require that nexus to be with the Human Rights Commission's business instead of with anybody who has any business with the city, because that's what seems, particularly with a larger city like Portland, you know, so overbroad, because it could be your husband or your wife, you know, has a client who does business with the city that really has nothing to do with your connection to the Human Rights Commission, but it would catch you up in any way. So, and that, you know, it's kind of dull, but it's written out here, and I don't want to, I know we've already used more than the time that we had allotted, so.
May I ask you just a very quick question? I just need to understand the document, the second document that you circulated, the government ethics law. So I am not a public officer, nor am I an employee of the city, so then therefore how does this apply?
Because the definition and interpretation has been broad enough that an appointed commissioner to a city commission would count.
So those Cuban cigars that I got today, you get in trouble? Okay, all right.
But we can accept this food and a cup of coffee from.
Right, and things, and there are exceptions. It talks about events where you know, where it's official, right? Official, you know, where you are speaking. Right, so if you're actually at the work function and there's some refreshments served, that's okay. But no, for some reason, no entertainment, so, you know, no tickets to whatever.
No joke center.
And it talks here about where, if you were asked to come somewhere and speak or answer questions, that's okay. If you're there doing official business, reviewing records or something, that's okay. If the food or beverage is incidental to the main purpose of the reception, but not a sit-down meal, then that's okay. So it's pretty extreme. And again, I'd be happy to talk more about this or come back if you have a chance to look at it and answer questions. I feel like I'm taking up more time.
It is okay though for the sit-down meal if the person pays for it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's just accepting as a gift.
Right.
And you can go to the Blazer game, you just have to buy your own ticket.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So if we have commissioners that individually went, for example, to a school or to an event or something and to speak or to represent, and they get a certificate card of $10 or $20, that counts toward the $50.
Yes.
After $50, we need to calculate that. So after $50, you return it back or you take it to be a public property?
You know, if you, like the mayor can accept things for the city that are actually for the city, I would say the better course probably would be to say, you know, there's this ethics rule and I really can't accept it. Again, you know, I'm happy to take calls if something specific comes up. It might depend case by case. I mean, there's an exception in here for plaques if someone tries to give you a plaque. But it would depend. I mean, if it's a situation where, you know, for instance, the mayor is often given things by sister cities, that sort of thing. As long as those come into the city's possession, obviously you wouldn't want to offend the sister city or whoever is, you know, offering that type of, that's okay to come to the city. But probably for the run-of-the-mill situation, it would be cleaner just not to accept something that's over the $50 limit. But if there are circumstances where that would be, you know, offensive or not considered to the person who's trying to make the gesture, and it really is to the city rather than to the individual, then I'd be glad to talk to you about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for assisting and answering legal questions when they've arisen.
Oh, yeah.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Next, Maria Elisa, the director of report, and also Commander Rica.
And Commander, would you mind joining us so we can see you, because
I'm hiding back here.
You're going to talk about the bias training report, so
Sure.
we can go.
Sure.
Thank you. So I will, I think we can make up some of this time because it doesn't look as though we have, or we may have public comment. But I won't take a whole lot of time, just to say, in the budget update, that I don't have any certainties yet from council members. There was a delegation that met this week with Commissioner Saltzman, and that meeting was okay. We didn't get a lot of feedback from Commissioner Saltzman about whether he would support or not support our budget. But he was very appreciative of the role of the commission and the committee, the Community and Police Relations Committee, and the work that they are doing on behalf of improving community police relations. And then I, as staff, met with Commissioner Leonard because he requested just a staff meeting, and with staff of Commissioner Adams' office about the budget. And what I learned is that, again, the same message that we're hearing, that it's going to be a challenging budget year. Some folks are not appreciating the request for full funding, that is an extreme request. So we may come back with a different sort of negotiation. I don't know if the opportunity is afforded. At the same time, I'm also hearing that there is an understanding that, and a recognition that taking away a position from our office at this time would really affect the infrastructure of our new bureau. And so that recognition is going forward. Mayor Adams is set to have a budget at the end of April, and at that time we will know whether full funding for the bureau is there or whether there is more of a cut.
When you say full funding, I thought we were comfortable with a 5% cut off of that ad package.
I'm sorry, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Full funding in terms of holding hold of position, but taking the 5% cut.
But they understand that we're comfortable with the 5% cut.
Yes.
I mean, we could.
Yes, and OMF was very clear about that in our budget presentation. So that is the general sense. I'm getting a lot of questions from the mayor's office about what is our baseline and how we measure the work, and determining that right away, which I don't have all the answers for, so I have some suggestions about how to approach that, and certainly we will measure our interventions. I think he is more interested in an overall baseline of race relations from Portland, which will take some funding and will take time to develop a strategy. The other question that he is asking is, what is the plan and the next steps for the community and police relations work? Specifically, more specifically, what is the next step? What is the next step? So with a 2-day turnaround, I was asked to provide a framework of a plan, and I haven't had a chance to share it with committee members. So please understand that was the request. It is in no way a final document, and I will share that with you this evening. I submitted it last evening. But yeah, so that's kind of the pace of things, very quick, and at the end of April there will be.
Do you anticipate that any commissioners will be at the public meetings about where the community gets the opportunity to speak up about the racial profiling police plan, those 2 meetings that are coming up? Would we expect to see Commissioner Saltzman there, for example?
My guess is that he would be there, but I haven't had confirmation from Chief Sizer whether he will be there. I don't know, I thought I do know whether Commissioner Fritz is planning to be there or whether council members. Yeah, okay, okay.
You don't know, you can't go.
Yeah, there's been a press release that the police bureau put out, and then I have been sending out, and then I sent out to all of you to recruit folks to come, and our role there is to listen, but I don't know. Yeah, so budget is still, I still don't have a firm commitment.
Who is sending out the invitation to them?
It's coming
who is
from,
informing the commissioners?
it should be Chief Sizer. Yeah.
Maybe she knows, I don't know.
Okay. So on the second bullet point, the RFP update. In the last meeting, the minutes reflect that I told you about a couple of RFPs that we were putting out as an office, and the first one was for a PR, a communications person, a person who would help the commission with strategic planning. That RFP, the decision will come tomorrow. We had 4 candidates and 2 are very high up, and so we will make a decision after interviewing those 2 candidates tomorrow. The other RFP, the larger RFP, that is to have a consultant assist us with training a pool of folks that could carry forward dialogues on peace building, truth and reconciliation, work with the police bureau. That RFP, we got 15 respondents, and we haven't had a chance to review those yet, so that is still in the logistics of needing to review. But hopefully we get someone very good and can assist in building that infrastructure for our office and program development. So in the bias, crimes, and human rights abuse report in brief that I wanted to share with you, I have been taking complaints around human rights cases, and Commander Eckhart is here to talk also about the bias crimes that the Police Bureau is tracking. I wanted to pass this out to you from our angle, and these include some of the hate crimes that have been reported to the Police Bureau as well. And also just have an opportunity to ask you sincerely how you as a commission want our office and want yourselves involved in these complaints and in addressing these complaints. So I'll just briefly talk about that and then give you, Commander, an opportunity to talk about the bias crimes. We have had so far 13 requests for assistance. We don't have, how many? 13 since September. I mean, even a little before September. So we have about 6 months of full operation. We've had 13 requests and complaints. They vary, you'll see, they vary over a broad range of issues. I'll wait till the...
Oh, these are attached.
They are? Oh, okay, good. I didn't realize that I was photocopying that too. Good, okay. It's also attached to your minutes. I didn't realize that. The trends that I am seeing is that we are seeing a number of cases of discrimination based on sexual orientation and hate violence around sexual orientation and sexual identity. Quite a number of cases of these 13, and probably you'll be reporting on those too. And then we're also seeing a number of cases of new immigrants coming to our office with complaints of abuses around employment, around lack of payment for work completed, and around arbitrary arrest and violations of law regarding detainers and holds by sheriffs. These are the general areas that we're seeing that have been reported. Of course, not everyone is aware of our office, and so these are the ones that have come to us from prior relationships with other organizations and just random hits on our website. The way that I am processing these concerns to date has been to contact the person, hear their story, provide a referral to an attorney, help them sort out what they can do. We will soon not have the capacity to address the large number of cases that we may get, particularly when we start doing PR about our office. And this is really my sincere question to you about how to handle this. We could approach it in a number of ways. We could set up an attorney pool as an advisory council to meet maybe quarterly and help us sort through cases, or be a resource to take cases for low cost or no cost initially, because many folks cannot afford an attorney. We could identify a couple or 3 people on the commission that would be willing to sort through or investigate a case. I don't think that a committee would be effective because cases don't come monthly necessarily, but there may be a flood of cases once in a while. So it might not be a committee's work, but I certainly would appreciate relying on a number of your expertise, to be able to sort through cases that have come forward. So I open it up to you for suggestions, or if you would like to hear from Commander Eckhart first, and then have a little time to think through.
We hopefully can contextualize it.
Right, right.
Actually, I do have a question before you
Can I just
to the police
start these,
report.
pass it around?
Is when these people contact you, it looks like you did refer them to the police a few times.
Yes, some cases come to us first and then we refer to police, and then some are reported to me by police officers that have had an incident, and so they're taking the courtesy to report back to us saying, this is what happened last night, there was a bias crime, there was a hate crime. So yeah, there are a number more than what I had heard about. Yeah.
Because if it's a crime, pretty much the police is going to be
And it should be.
go to. And I suppose why people report this is because they don't comfort their call the police.
Right. In the two instances that people have not felt comfortable, there has been a fear of police. And the second one was that the individual exiting a bar on Stark Street was inebriated and so didn't call the police at that point in time. Welcome, Kathleen. Please join us.
I'm fine right here.
Okay. So, yeah, those two instances. Were they delayed in contacting, or they just didn't contact, they were too reticent to contact them? Which we can serve as a bridge.
May I on one hand, I guess I think to contextualize this information that we have, particularly those of us who have been absent a couple of times, I would like to probably hold some of the questions, but just something that you said that caught my attention. Because I heard very clearly from you that you were seeking some feedback from us and direct answers to your questions, and I don't think you got any answers. So I'd like to at least add one. It is my understanding, based on what I know about our colleagues sitting at the table, although the table was mixed, that we have several individuals that are qualified because they have had experience conducting investigations. And that would be but one source that you might consider tapping into, and if that is the case, then maybe that would be an item that we would like to talk about later on, maybe after Commander talks to us. But certainly, I know personally that there are at least 3 individuals sitting at the table that do have skills along those lines.
Okay, maybe we'll move to Commander